On August the 12th, 1915, a group of British soldiers marched into the hills of Gallipoli, and to the men watching from behind, it looked as if they had simply vanished into thin air. No signal came back, no clear message, no organized retreat, just a line of men moving forward through smoke, scrub, gunfire, and dust. And then, silence. Years later, a stranger version of the story began to spread. Witnesses claimed that a strange cloud had been hanging over the battlefield that day. They said the soldiers marched into it, and when the cloud lifted, the men were gone. No bodies, no equipment, no explanation. It sounded like something supernatural, but the truth behind the vanished soldiers of Gallipoli may be even darker than the legend, because this was not a story about men disappearing into another world. It was a story about war, confusion, bad orders, broken terrain, and families who waited for answers that almost never came. This is the story of the vanished Battalion of Gallipoli. In the summer of 1915, the Gallipoli Campaign was already turning into a disaster. The Allied plan had sounded simple on paper: force a way through the Dardanelles, threaten the Ottoman capital, and open a sea route to Russia. But once soldiers landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula, the campaign became something else entirely. Steep ridges, dry gullies, thick scrub, heat, thirst, disease, and Ottoman defenders who knew the land far better than the men attacking it. By August, the Allies were desperate for a breakthrough, so a new landing was launched at Suvla Bay. It was supposed to break the deadlock. Instead, it became another battlefield of confusion. Among the units sent into this chaos was the 1st 5th Battalion of the Norfolk Regiment. Many of them were territorial soldiers, not hardened veterans of years of war. Some came from Norfolk villages and rural communities. A small group had a special connection to the royal estate at Sandringham, which later made their fate even more famous. They were ordinary men, pulled into an extraordinary disaster, and on August the 12th, they were ordered forward. Their objective was part of a wider advance across the Suvla Plain toward the foothills beyond, but the terrain was not clean or simple. The men were not marching across an open field where commanders could easily track them. They were moving through broken ground, smoke, scrub, ravines, and enemy fire. This matters because legends often begin when people cannot see what really happened. The Norfolks advanced with other British units, including men from the Hampshire and Suffolk regiments. But the attack was badly coordinated. Support was weak, maps were poor, orders were unclear, and as the men pushed forward, the line began to lose shape. Some troops slowed, some stopped, others pressed ahead. The Norfolks, or at least a large part of them, moved farther than the units around them. And then they entered an area of trees, scrub, and broken land. From behind, observers could no longer follow them clearly. They were not lifted into the sky. They were not erased from the earth. They were swallowed by the battlefield. And in Gallipoli, that could be just as deadly. The official language used after the battle helped turn the moment into a mystery. Commanders wrote that the men had gone forward and were lost from sight and sound. To families reading those words back home, it sounded impossible. How could hundreds of men simply vanish? Where were the prisoners? Where were the survivors? Where were the bodies? And when the king himself asked for news, the fate of the Sandringham men became more than a military question. It became personal. People wanted an answer, but in 1915, the army could not give them one. Some believed the men had been captured by Ottoman forces. Others feared they had been massacred. Some thought they were simply missing somewhere in the chaos of the battlefield. And over time, uncertainty created space for something stranger. The cloud story. Decades after the war, accounts appeared claiming that strange clouds had been seen over the battlefield. Some described them as loaf-shaped. Some said they seemed unnatural. Some claimed they did not move with the wind. And the most famous version said the soldiers marched into one of these clouds and never came out.
It is easy to understand why that story survived. It gives shape to the unknown. It turns battlefield confusion into a single image. But when we look at the event as history, the cloud becomes much less certain. The testimony came long after the battle, and it does not match cleanly with the military records. Gallipoli was already full of smoke, dust, heat haze, shell bursts, and low cloud around rough terrain. In other words, a battlefield can create illusions, not because witnesses are lying, but because war destroys the normal way people understand what they are seeing. A man standing far away might see a unit disappear into haze and scrub. A survivor might hear no more from them. A family might receive no body, no grave, no final letter. And years later, memory turns the moment into something almost supernatural. But the real answer was waiting on the ground. After the war, Search parties returned to Gallipoli. They were not looking for legends. They were looking for the dead. And what they found was grim. Remains were discovered in the area where the Norfolks had advanced, not neatly buried, not gathered in one clear military formation, but scattered across rough ground near and beyond the Ottoman line. Some were identified as men of the 5th Norfolks, but only a few could be named with certainty. The rest became part of Gallipoli's silent dead. And this discovery changed the meaning of the mystery. The men had not disappeared into thin air. They had gone too far forward. They had become isolated, and in the brutal conditions of that failed attack, they were cut down. Some may have been killed as they advanced, some may have reached a farm or broken cover, some may have been surrounded. But the most likely truth is not supernatural. It is military disaster. A unit pushed forward. Support failed to reach them. Communication broke apart. The terrain hid them. Enemy fire found them. And by the time anyone understood what had happened, it was too late. This is why the story still matters, because the legend of the cloud is haunting, but the reality is worse in a different way. If men vanish into a cloud, the mind can imagine mystery. But if men vanish because their commanders lose sight of them, because maps fail, because support collapses, battlefield becomes a machine that consumes people. That is not mystery, that is war. For the families back in Britain, especially those connected to Sandringham, the waiting must have been unbearable. A missing soldier is not the same as a dead soldier. Death is final, but missing is a wound that stays open. The vanished battalion became a legend because it sat in the space between fact and grief. The army could not explain it clearly. Battlefield hid the evidence, the bodies were not recovered for years, and the words used by commanders made the loss sound almost impossible. So when people ask what happened to the vanished battalion, the honest answer is this: they did not vanish because the impossible happened. They vanished because the battlefield was chaotic enough and the war was cruel enough to make the impossible seem believable. And maybe that is why the story survived. Not because the cloud explains the truth, but because the cloud represents what the families felt.